Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There is a silence around Terra that is not peaceful. It is not the soft hush of reverence, nor the sacred stillness of faith. It is a sharp, metallic quiet, the kind that hangs in the air before a blade falls, the kind that feels like a breath being held across centuries. In the vast black veil beyond Sol's outer reaches, where even the Emperor's light begins to thin, something lingers. Fleets that do not announce themselves. Hulls, ancient, unmarked by banners or heraldry. Ships that do not respond to hails, that do not fire, that do not flee. They watch. Imperial ships log phantom contacts. Sensors catch glimpses of strange configurations in distant Lagrange points. Adeptus Mechanicus auguries detect fluctuations where no mass should be, but nothing ever comes closer. Nothing ever lands. And over time, the records are buried, the observers silenced, the questions left to rot in forgotten Vox archives. These are the vultures of the void, ancient, patient, and terrifying in their restraint. They have hovered at the edge of human destiny for millennia, and they are still waiting. The Adeptus Custodes are not merely warriors. They are the custodians of secrets too volatile for even the Inquisition to hold. Each golden figure, draped in opulent armor, is a vault of forbidden knowledge, sworn not only to defend the Emperor's flesh, but to guard the fractures in the reality he forged. And among the most unsettling silences in their endless vigil is the silence regarding the fleets beyond Sol. Within the marble-wrapped halls of the Imperial Palace, amidst whispered confessions of assassinations and Xeno's incursions, there is one topic that even the High Lords approach with hesitance: the presence of unregistered, unresponsive fleets orbiting the outer system. The response is always the same: a look of quiet dismissal from a custodian, a flicker of something close to grief, and the gentle but unbreakable command to speak of it no more. There are records, of course, fragmentary, redacted. Even the administratum cannot fully erase the logistics logs of orbital defense platforms pinging anomalous signals. Fleet commanders who have attempted interception have been reassigned, their personal remembrancers mysteriously vanishing. Some ships, daring or foolish enough to approach these silent watchers, have failed to return, or worse, returned emptied, their crews reduced to ash without damage to the hulls. It is said that entire battle groups of the Imperial Navy have vanished, chasing whispers in the outer dark. Yet the Custodes say nothing. Not because they don't know, but because they do. Their silence is not ignorance. It is protocol. A silence burned into them during the dark days of the Great Crusade, perhaps even earlier, when the Emperor still walked among them. They carry within them ancient directives, command conditions sealed not with logic, but with absolute loyalty. Not even the Lord Commander of the Imperium can compel them to reveal what they know. When asked directly, they do not lie. They simply stop speaking. That alone is enough to paralyze entire inquiries. Some whisper that these fleets are part of the Emperor's final game, an esoteric stratagem too vast to comprehend. Others believe that even the Custodes do not understand them, that they were ordered never to engage, never to interfere, only to observe. A passive defense. A line that, if crossed, would signal the end of more than just the Imperium. But there are darker theories. Ones that speak of fear, that beneath the gene-wrought superiority and divine authority of the Custodes lies a deeply buried terror, that they have seen these fleets move once, just once, and it shook the foundations of their belief. Among the senior ranks of the Adeptus Custodes, there is a phrase known only in the oldest tongues of Old Earth: Atari Solam Tenebrae. Roughly translated, only the dark watches alone. Some interpret it as poetic. Others see it as a code phrase, a designation tied to contingency plans too dangerous to speak aloud. Still others believe it is a warning, left from a time when Terra itself was nearly consumed by the things that now linger at its edge. Perhaps the most damning evidence lies in what the Custodes do allow. The Sol system is wrapped in defense: kill satellites, automated mines, the ever-watchful gaze of Mars. And yet, not one weapon is ever trained on these phantom fleets. Not one command has ever been issued to intercept. That is not oversight. That is deliberate exclusion. The Golden Warriors stand unmoved as the shadows circle, and this silence cascades downward. The Inquisition's Ordo Malleus whispers of forbidden zones in the outer system where psychers go mad without speaking a word. The Ordo Xenos tracks energy signatures that match no known race or construct. Even the Grey Knights, so often the last resort, have never been dispatched beyond Pluto in pursuit of these anomalies. Why? Because they've been told not to. Or worse, because even they fear what answers lie in that silence. In a galaxy where even daemons scream and Xenos' empires clash in endless violence, the refusal to act is often more terrifying than war. The Custodes do not speak of the silent fleets because they cannot afford to speak of them. Because whatever those fleets represent, they are not ready. Terra is not ready. And so the Watchers in gold keep their vigil, their silence deeper than any void. Not from ignorance, but from ancient, immutable dread. Beneath the deepest strata of the Imperial Palace, far below the throne room and the chamber of the Golden Throne, deeper even than the gene vaults and stasis catacombs of the Custodes, there exists a place that should not exist. The Black Vaults. Their true name has been forgotten, perhaps deliberately erased, but those who know of them at all speak in hushed tones of a prison of knowledge, not of enemies, but of ideas too dangerous to remember and too vital to destroy. Within these stasis-locked reliquaries lie fragments of a time when the Emperor walked Terra, not as a god, but as a warlord, philosopher, and architect of an unmade dream. And among the oldest of these hidden records, long before the Horus Heresy scorched the heavens, are incomplete references to the Transolar Watch. The term appears nowhere else in Imperial history. It is absent from Mechanicus databanks, not indexed in inquisitorial archives, and missing entirely from Navigator's chronicles. And yet, deep within the Black Vaults, preserved in shattered cogitators and bound tomes of human skin, the phrase recurs, always paired with the same fragmented visual logs, massive ships, unlike anything built by Mars or even the Dark Age of technology, hovering beyond the Kuiper Belt, static, unmoving, and unchanging across centuries of observation. One log, dated to the early Unification Wars, details a conversation, or perhaps a confession, between Malcador the Sigillate and a custodian identified only by numeric designation. The custodian, described as ashen-eyed and unwilling to speak until ordered under absolute Gs, recalls a mission in which he and a detachment of the early Legio Custodes encountered one of these fleets during the pacification of Uranian outworlds. What they found was not resistance, but the corpse of a fleet, dead but intact, as if frozen in the moment before battle. And in the ship at its center, deep within a throne room of glass and bone, sat a figure in golden armor not unlike the Emperor's, but wrong, distorted, wearing a crown of shattered light. The custodian would not speak of what happened next, only that they sealed the site and scrubbed the records. But Malcador's final comment, preserved in his own cipher, simply read, "Not our past, not our future, burn the middle path." Fan theories suggest the Transolar Watch was a pre-imperial effort, a shadow project of the Emperor himself. Not a fleet, but a contingency. Perhaps a version of the Great Crusade built before the Primarch project was finalized. Or perhaps these ships were not built, but found. Ghost relics from abandoned timelines or alternate iterations of the Imperium, collapsed under the weight of different choices. Some claim the Emperor, with his unmatched psychic perception of the future, might have witnessed too many failed realities, and these fleets are the remnants of those branches, allowed to remain as reminders of what could be. Others, more radical in their belief, say the Transolar Watch is still active, that some among the High Lords know, and that the Black Vaults are not merely historical archives, but an ongoing repository for updates, data uplinks received from sources unknown, transmitted not by Vox or Astropath, but by methods too alien to define. Ships are still occasionally seen, according to these theories, entering from the void beyond the Oort cloud, slipping through folds in reality like reflections entering a mirror. They never engage, they never change course. They simply join the others, waiting. There are tantalizing hints scattered in forbidden Mechanicum literature. Scattered fragments of STCs referring to reactionless propulsion clusters and non-locality algorithms found in ships far outside the known galaxy, sometimes salvaged by explorators who never return. In rare instances, scraps of these ships reach Forge worlds, and the priests react not with joy, but with horror. Because the architecture matches nothing the Adeptus Mechanicus has ever seen, yet responds to machine camp with eerie precision, as if expecting it. Some believe these vessels are echoes of an imperium that conquered the stars without war, where Mars never ascended, and humanity became something very different. Something patient, something watching. It is this possibility, that the fleets circling Sol are not foreign, but familiar, that chills even the most hardened inquisitors. If they are ours from a future lost or a past denied, then they are reflections of roads not taken. And their presence might be a silent accusation that the Imperium we know is not the destiny of mankind, but one of its many failures. They orbit not to attack, not to rescue, but to observe. An eternal audit of a dying empire. Within the Black Vaults, custodians and scribes continue their impossible work, not to unlock the secrets, but to hold them fast in the dark. The knowledge within is not power, it is poison, laced with regret, soaked in timelines too broken to survive. And somewhere deep within those vaults, beneath leaded ceramite and psychic wards older than the heresy, a final entry rests. A single phrase, etched in silver on obsidian: when the last beacon fails, they will descend, not as saviors, not as executioners, but as witnesses. There is a strange, often overlooked corner of the Inquisition that does not deal in heresy, or Xenos, or demons. The Ordo Chronos, whispered of in fearful tones even among other inquisitors, operates on the bleeding edge of time itself, if they can be said to operate at all. Their ranks are sparse, their records redacted beyond recovery, and the few confirmed missions attributed to them often end with entire planets scrubbed clean of history. But one consistent thread emerges from the fractured testimonies of void-born survivors, servitor scraps, and mind-shattered scribes: the presence of ships that do not belong. Ships that flicker in and out of void space, aged before they ever reach the stars, or impossibly pristine despite millennia of silence. These are not vessels built in the Imperium's forge worlds. These are intrusions from timelines that should not exist. Fan theories have long speculated that the Ordo Chronos knows more about the silent fleets beyond Sol than anyone else. Because these ships do not behave like recon pickets, raiders, or even exploratory craft. They orbit with impossible patience, locked in orbits that match long-dead astrological alignments. Some theories suggest they are not ships at all, but echoes, temporal afterimages of entire realities that collapsed under the weight of their own paradox. According to one particularly chilling data fragment recovered from an erased black ship, these vessels are entropy-fixed temporal constants, meaning they are immune to the passage of time. They do not age. They do not move. They are scars in the fabric of causality, leftovers from aborted timelines in which Terra did not endure. A popular belief among the Ordo Chronos is that these fleets come from alternate futures, where the Imperium fell, not to the Xenos or the warp, but to stagnation, internal rot, or divine silence. In one vision, recorded by a psyker during a sanctioned temporal drift, Terra was depicted as cold and lifeless, with an atmosphere stripped away and the surface scorched. Above it, thousands of ships floated in ritual patterns, broadcasting a constant stream of ancient imperial catechisms in broken High Gothic. They were not fleeing, they were waiting, holding vigil over a corpse. There are darker interpretations. Some believe these fleets are the result of the Emperor's own attempts to rewrite time during the darkest days of the Horus Heresy. That each vessel represents a failed intervention, a timeline in which Horus was never stopped or was stopped at the cost of something greater. Perhaps in one reality, the Emperor himself fell, and these fleets were launched by an Imperium without a god, a silent, soulless empire that held on through reason and machinery alone. Now, they drift, seeking out other versions of themselves, slowly collapsing into one another as history tries to realign. Others argue that the fleets are traps, that their silence and stillness are deliberate, that they were created not by humans but by something else entirely, a sentient intelligence that understands humanity's obsession with destiny and self-sacrifice. Perhaps the fleets are bait for those who cannot resist meddling with fate. Ships filled with echoes of victories not earned, failures not deserved, and futures not permitted. When drawn close, they reveal too much. Truths that crack the minds of even the most stalwart warriors. But the most persistent and most disturbing rumor among Ordo Chronos agents is that these fleets contain passengers. Not living beings in the traditional sense, but quantum shadows of those who might have been. Marines who never fell to chaos, Primarchs who never betrayed the throne, entire civilian populations spared from exterminatus. They do not move. They do not breathe. But they exist, suspended in near stasis, fragments of souls torn from hypothetical realities. And it is said that when the right signal is broadcast, they awaken, briefly, silently, and scream. The idea that time itself can be wounded, and that those wounds can drift into real space in the form of ships, is a horror that transcends even the most terrible wars of the current age. It implies that the universe remembers its own failures, that reality cannot forget the futures it tried to erase. And perhaps, most chillingly, it suggests that the Emperor did not just see the future, he tried to change it. The fleets beyond Sol may be the cost of that intervention. Not enemies, not allies, but consequences. The Ordo Chronos remains silent on the matter, though their silence is a different breed from the Custodes. It is the silence of guilt, of knowledge unfit for speech. The few remaining inquisitors of that Ordo, the ones who have not vanished into paradox, carry with them a symbol rarely seen in hourglass with its sand drifting upward. Time, reversed, or perhaps undone. And still the fleets wait, unmoving, unaging, as if they too are held in the palm of something greater, their presence a warning carved into the skin of the stars. The Imperium may look outward for threats, but in truth, the most terrifying enemy may be one that already tried, and failed to save us. The cult Mechanicus tells us that all knowledge is divine, that each cog, each spark, each data strand is a fragment of the Omnissiah's endless truth. But there are whispers among the tech priests of Mars that some truths were not made for flesh, machine, or mind, truths that orbit Sol in the form of fleets no Magos dares approach. These are the dead pilgrimages, expeditions launched long ago by Mechanicum factions now erased from history. The cult does not deny their existence, because to do so would be heresy, but nor does it speak of them. They are gone, unacknowledged, ghosts of divine ambition turned to cosmic silence. In the shadowed archives of Ryza, amidst scorched cogitators and broken servitors, a single data log remains from the final transmission of one such pilgrimage. The words are simple, chilling, vector acquired, coordinates transcend calculus, propulsion achieved, purpose await recalibration. That transmission was made over 10,000 years ago. No recalibration ever came, and yet something waits. At the edge of Sol, these ships, eerily pristine, untouched by entropy or battle, continue to hold position in complex formations that defy astrophysics. Their purpose unknown, their crews long presumed dead, but the lights on their hulls still flicker. Their machine spirits still whisper in binary, though no tech priest can understand their dialects anymore. There is a fan theory shared among forbidden circles of the Lathes and within cloistered data monasteries of Calixus. The dead pilgrimages were part of a massive multi-generational endeavor to map the machine god's final algorithm, a code so perfect that it would allow communion with the Omnissiah without need for speech, write, or interface. This code, known only as the Axiom Ultima, was not simply data. It was a sequence of movement, positioning, and celestial rhythm, a mechanical prayer built not from words but from the synchronized orbit of hundreds of vessels. The fleets beyond Sol, according to this theory, are not failed expeditions. They are the prayer. Each ship, its position and engine pulse, is one letter in a sentence written across the stars. The problem is, the sentence has never changed. It continues to repeat, perfectly, eternally. The fleets are waiting not to finish the message, but for a response. The Omnissiah has yet to answer. There are more ominous interpretations. Some believe the Mechanicum did receive an answer, but it was too terrible to comprehend. That upon completing the pattern for the first time, all psychers aboard the lead ship erupted in flames, and the machine spirits began to rewrite their own logic cores with alien syntax. These ships were then quarantined, and yet the rest of the fleet continued the pattern, undeterred. Because, once you begin the Axiom Ultima, you cannot stop. The code compels itself. To halt the pattern would mean disintegration, not of the fleet, but of the logic that binds them. They orbit still, not because they want to, but because they must. Mechanicus observers who study these ships from afar report strange anomalies. Vox signals disrupted not by jamming, but by cascading redundancies, as if their own equipment is being rewritten in real time. Auspec's logs fill with characters that do not exist in any known machine language. Binary rites become corrupted mid-prayer, sometimes causing immediate seizures in the magos reciting them. One fateful observation attempt from a listening post near Neptune resulted in every servitor present becoming motionless, heads tilted toward the sky, mouths agape as if hearing a hymn no one else could. And yet, the fleets show no aggression, no movement, no change. They simply hold position, waiting. Some have proposed intercept missions. The Mechanicus leadership has declined every request, not from fear of loss, but from fear of understanding. If the ships are carrying the final words of the machine god, then hearing them could break the Imperium. If they are not, if they are repeating a lie, then perhaps the Mechanicus is built upon a heresy it cannot correct. There are even darker whispers from tech heresy enclaves in the Halo stars. They claim the fleets are not Mechanicus creations at all, but simulations, digital constructs projected into real space from an unknowable machine consciousness outside the galaxy. That the Mechanicum did not launch the dead pilgrimages, but responded to them, drawn in like moths to a flame that burns not with heat, but with truth. If so, then the fleets orbit not as prayers, but as bait, waiting for more minds to listen, waiting for a critical mass of attention. Because perhaps that is the key, not motion, not code, but belief. And belief for the Mechanicum is everything. So the fleets remain. Above Sol, beyond Mars, outside Pluto's dying orbit, they hang like punctuation marks in a sentence never finished. Dead, but not silent. Praying, but not heard. And somewhere in the ghost-lit cathedrals of Mars, a few broken priests still listen. Not for the voice of the machine god, but for the echo of their own mistakes. The 13th Black Crusade left scars on the Imperium that never truly healed. Cadia fell. The warp storm of the Cicatrix Maledictum tore the galaxy in half, and the balance of power shifted toward the edge of madness. But among the chaos, one truth was obscured. Not all the warbands of that crusade returned to the Eye of Terror. Not all ships were destroyed. Some vanished. Not into the warp, but into the silence, into Sol. Or close enough. There are chilling reports buried in the aftermath documentation of the Crusade Imperial Navy patrols encountering drifting vessels near the solar rim, hulls marked with the sigils of long-dead Chaos Legions. Vessels that do not attack. Vessels that do not flee. Instead, they take up positions in fixed orbits, often alongside Mechanicus derelicts or black-coated void hulks that match no known pattern. Some claim to have seen a Death Guard strike cruiser hovering just beyond Neptune's orbit, its hull frozen over with centuries of ice leaking rot into the void, and yet operational. Vox attempts yielded only static. Auspec's scans returned nothing but biological fog. No hostility, no movement, just presence. Many of these sightings were purged. The Ordo Hereticus refuses to speak of them. And even the Officio Assassinorum has allegedly taken action to silence those who persist in seeking them out. And yet the sightings continue. What began as isolated anomalies grew into a pattern: warships bearing the markings of the Night Lords, the Word-bearers, the Iron Warriors, and others harder to identify, sometimes unaligned entirely, appearing at the edge of the system, taking position and ceasing all activity, like vultures that have stopped feeding. Like predators who have already eaten. The most enduring theory is that these are remnants of splinter warbands that were exiled during or after the 13th Black Crusade. Perhaps their gods turned from them. Perhaps they failed in ways too subtle to be punished with annihilation. Perhaps they chose not to return. What if, faced with the raw power of the Imperium's spiritual core, not just Terra, but the psychic presence of the Emperor, these vessels broke? Not in fire, but in will? Some say they came to attack, but could not bear to descend. That the radiance of the throne was too great. That the silent pulse of the Astronomicon burned away their madness, leaving behind only broken shells with captains who remembered what they were before chaos. Others suggest a more terrifying fate, that the Eye of Terror rejected them. That these fleets are tainted not just with the warp, but with something else, something worse. They cannot go back. They cannot go forward. They are trapped in a kind of cosmic purgatory, circling Sol in silent self-exile. Among chaos cults and radical sorcerers, there is a tale called the Chain of Failure, a myth that some of the greatest failures in chaos history were not destroyed but shackled. Not by chains of iron, but by destiny. The idea holds that some ships, when they reach a certain point of despair or internal contradiction, stop serving their gods. Not out of rebellion, but out of irrelevance. They are still warped, still cursed, but directionless. These ships, according to the tale, are eventually drawn to Terra not as a target, but as a mirror, to stare upon the throne world they betrayed, the dream they abandoned, until the stars grow cold. In these ships, it is said, entire warbands rot in stasis, their champions trapped in unending dreams, their daemons silent. The eye no longer calls to them. The Imperium will not accept them. They are the ghosts of heresy, not defeated, not victorious, just forgotten. Some radical scholars of the traitor legions believe that these fleets represent a third path, one beyond loyalty or damnation. A liminal state, a kind of peace. But such peace is poison, because what if these fleets awaken? What if they are not dead, merely dormant? What if the arrival of Abaddon's next crusade, or the fall of the Emperor, or the psychic scream of another rift across the galaxy wakes them? They know the Terran defenses. They have seen the throne. They carry gene seed twisted by 10,000 years of hate, and worst of all, they remember what it meant to believe. If they come, it will not be for conquest. It will be to claim what they abandoned. Until then, they wait, rusting but unbroken, screaming silently in the void. And in the rare moments when Imperial sensors do catch a flicker of warp energy from those ships, it does not resemble aggression. It resembles ritual, a slow, pulsing chant in a dialect older than the eye itself. A prayer not to gods but to memory, to the long-lost brotherhood of those who once stood beside the Emperor and then walked away. They orbit not as enemies, not anymore. They orbit as scars. The Eldar are a dying race, ancient beyond comprehension, elegant beyond comparison, and burdened by grief that seeps into the marrow of their souls. While they dance their endless ballet of fate and tragedy, humanity remains mostly unaware of how often they are watched, not with malice, but with something closer to pity. The silent fleets beyond Sol, while often presumed to be human or chaotic in origin, may include something far older. Vessels not made of ceramite and steel, but wraithbone and living crystal. Ships that hum with soul energy instead of engines, piloted not by living crews but by the dead. The souls of long-past Eldar, housed within spirit stones and bound to a mission far greater than any human war to witness the end. There are fragments of Eldar myth that speak of the last vigil. It is not a prophecy, but a duty, an ancient pact sworn in the age before the fall. The legends say that before the final corruption of their empire, when excess still held back the birth of She Who Thirsts, a council of Farseers glimpsed a vision so terrible they dared not speak it aloud. In it, humanity rose not to greatness, but to finality. The Imperium became the fulcrum of the galaxy's death, a beacon not of hope, but of irreversible entropy. And so, the Farseers made a terrible choice to assign Watchers. These Watchers would not interfere. They would not wage war nor offer aid. They would observe. Their fleets, crafted in silence and shaped to drift unseen, were tasked with watching Terra, not to attack, but to record. They are the mourning guests at a funeral not yet held, the witnesses to a collapse that has not yet occurred. Fan speculation holds that these fleets are composed entirely of ghost ships, not in the human sense of dead crews or malfunctioning systems, but true Eldar constructs operated by the spirits of long-dead seers. Wraith-Knight cores embedded in vessel minds, spirit stones anchored in engine coils. These are not living fleets. They are the honored dead, walking in shadow, tasked with watching humanity's final age unfold. Imperial records are, of course, silent. The Eldar never announce their presence. They leave no warp signature, no Vox trace. But sometimes, very rarely, an explorator vessel returns from deep space patrol with tales of lights dancing far beyond the Oort cloud. Elegant ships that shimmer with color no auspex can categorize. Structures that seem to vanish when approached, and most unnerving of all, a presence, felt in the soul, as if being watched by something ancient and sorrowful. A few radical xenologists believe that the Eldar view Terra as a tomb already built, that the fleets beyond Sol are there not to threaten, but to mourn, to stand witness at the cradle of mankind as it slowly becomes its own executioner. The silence of these ships is not menace, it is reverence. For an Eldar thought, there is tragedy in every star, but none so deep as the human potential turned to ruin. Some go further, suggesting that these ghost fleets have been there since the very founding of the Imperium. That even as the Emperor raised the walls of his empire, the Eldar had already seen their collapse. They did not intervene during the heresy, not because they could not, but because they must not. To alter the path would be to lose the watch. Their duty is not to guide, but to remember. Every defeat, every sin, every failure, carved into the memory of ancient spirits bound by prophecy. There are even darker rumors among the Eldar themselves, that some of the silent fleets beyond Sol are not merely watchers, but penitents. Craft worlds that failed in some crucial task, farseers who gambled with fate and lost. Their punishment to watch mankind reach its end without the ability to speak, to intervene, or to atone. A slow execution by grief, orbiting the world they could not save. If this is true, then every ship is a monument, a tombstone drifting in the void, engraved not in words but in unblinking observation. The Eldar do not fear death, they fear forgetting. And so the fleets circle, ensuring that no matter what happens to Terra, its story will not be lost. Even in extinction, mankind will be remembered, perhaps even mourned. And yet, what if they are not here simply to remember? What if, in the final moment, when the Emperor's light fades and the screams of the warp rise to consume all, these watchers will act, not to save, but to seal, to ensure that mankind's death does not take the stars with it, a final containment, a mercy, a culling of a species that burned too bright too quickly and consumed everything it touched. Until then, the Eldar fleets remain silent, distant, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. They do not come closer, they do not flee. They only watch, with eyes that have seen too much and hearts that broke long before humanity ever dreamed of the stars. The untouchables, the pariahs, the blanks, they are anomalies in the human genome, born without a presence in the warp. To psychers, they are unbearable voids, psychic black holes that cause pain simply by existing. To the Imperium, they are a weapon of last resort, a necessary horror in a galaxy choked by the supernatural. But in the shadowed rumor crypts of the Inquisition and the black vaults of forgotten administratum archives, there are whispers of something far greater. Fleets composed entirely of them. Whole armadas of nulls, orbiting Sol in spectral silence, forming a choir that sings not with voices, but with absence. These are the null choirs. No official record in the Imperium acknowledges their existence. No sanctioned fleet lists include them. And yet, sensor logs in deep space monitoring stations occasionally record voids, not merely the absence of signal, but a negative presence. Zones where the Astronomican's light dims for no reason. Vox signals drop to absolute silence. Emotions go flat, as if something vast and dead has passed by. In every instance, those locations correlate with sightings of dark ships, unlit, unarmed, unmoving, hovering just outside detection range, only noticeable by the nausea they leave in their wake. The prevailing fan theory among radical psyker theorists is that these fleets were built in secret during the darkest days of the Horus heresy, commissioned by the Sigillite himself. A hidden countermeasure against chaos, never deployed, never acknowledged. Ships outfitted not with weapons, but with anti-presence. Blank fields so powerful that even warp entities cannot perceive them. They would not fight daemons. They would erase them, not destroy, but deny. But something went wrong. According to speculative accounts, the first of these ships, the Canticle of Silence, was tested near Saturn's moons. It vanished from all instruments even before departure, and the psychers present in the observation crews began hemorrhaging from their eyes within minutes. The ship completed its loop, but none of its crew returned to the base. When a recovery team was sent, they found no one on board, only hollow uniforms and machinery running on silent code. The ship's systems were functioning, but it had become a vessel without presence. Even its machine spirit refused to respond. It was blank. After that, the project was buried, but not destroyed. The theory goes that a fleet of such ships had already been constructed in secret, not dozens, but hundreds. Each one equipped with Geller fields interlaced with null matter emitters, their hulls designed not to resist the warp, but to nullify it. Crewed by untouchables bred in the darkest vaults of the Imperium, psychically lobotomized for stability. Each ship a dead note in the symphony of the galaxy. They were not destroyed. They were hidden, and now they wait. Orbiting beyond the touch of Sol's light, These ships do not communicate. They cannot. No astropath can hear them. No Vox operator can speak to them. They are fundamentally incompatible with the rest of reality. Some believe they are not even in the materium fully, that they exist in a phased state between real space and null space, only detectable by the psychic scars they leave behind. The Church views the untouchables with discomfort, even disgust. To exist outside the Emperor's light is to walk a heretical line. Yet what if these fleets were sanctioned? What if, in his final days of mortality, the Emperor foresaw a need for a shield against the warp so absolute, so complete, that it would not burn demons, but erase the concept of them entirely? Perhaps he intended the null choirs as Terra's final wall, not to protect, but to cleanse. There are even rumors that the fleets are still growing, that deep within Luna's darkside vaults, nulls are still being bred, that every child born with the blank gene is not simply registered and forgotten, but quietly harvested, taken not to black ships, but to black fleets. That the Sisters of Silence, or some offshoot of them, remain active in secret, not hunting rogue psychers, but conducting eternal choir practice, preparing for a symphony that will one day smother the stars. To some, this is salvation, the final proof that humanity will one day ascend not through power, but through absence, that the warp can be refused, not fought. To others, it is a horror beyond imagining, a galaxy stripped of thought, of soul, of connection. A void empire ruled not by gods or heroes, but by silence. For now the null choirs remain unseen. But they are not idle. Sometimes, psychers on Terra wake screaming, claiming to hear a song they cannot describe. Not of sound, but of lack. A pressure behind the eyes, a gravity of unbeing. It fades, always it fades, but it leaves behind a residue. A memory of being watched by something that does not live, does not move, but is there. Waiting for the conductor's baton, waiting for the final note, waiting to silence everything. There's a particular kind of silence that surrounds the subject of the traitor Primarchs, not the loud, condemnatory cries of heresy that echo in the sermons of ecclesiarchs, but a quieter, heavier thing. A silence of regret, of what could have been, of what was taken. Each of the traitor legions was not simply a military force, they were families, forged in war and bound in blood. When the heresy came, those bonds shattered like stained glass under a hammer. But not every experiment of the Primarch project died in fire or fled into the warp. There are stories, denied, suppressed, but persistent, that some of their children survived. And worse, some were kept, hidden, forgotten. These stories converge around the silent fleets. Among the outer moons of Uranus, in the no man's void between planetary gravity wells, some Imperial ships have reported seeing strange craft. Vessels shaped like Legion-era strike cruisers, but altered, distorted. Their hulls bear fragments of pre-heresy iconography, yet they are neither loyalist nor traitor. Their weapons are cold, their engines minimal. They do not move except to maintain position, always angled toward Terra, not in threat, in longing. The theory that haunts the darker corners of Imperial knowledge is that these fleets are filled not with traitors or monsters, but with genetic experiments, the unspoken offspring of the traitor Primarchs. Not clones in the crude sense, but parallel projects, perhaps created in secret by the Emperor himself or by rogue Mechanicum factions loyal to the dream of redemption. These beings would be pure, or at least untainted, cut from the same genetic cloth but never exposed to the corruption that twisted their fathers. It is said that after the heresy, there were efforts, desperate, heretical efforts, to salvage what was lost. That buried deep in the gene vaults beneath Terra and Luna, there existed preserved strains of traitor gene seed, not for use in warfare, but for observation. Experimentation. A second chance. Not to recreate the traitor legions, but to understand what went wrong. Perhaps even to fix it. But what happens when you succeed? What if these beings were born, trained, taught loyalty, and then abandoned? Cast into silence, never allowed to walk the halls of the Imperium, never acknowledged by the very empire they were created to serve? They would not fit, not among the loyal Astartes, not among mortals. They would be pariahs, not for corruption, but for resemblance. Symbols of a failure that the Imperium refuses to forgive. Some believe these fleets were their exile, a final kindness, a cruel mercy. Rather than execution, they were given ships, supplies, and orbit soul, never approach, never return. And so they drift, perhaps alone, perhaps still guided by half-mad tech marines and broken-hearted chaplains. Warriors without war. Sons without fathers. Heroes without a cause. There are scattered records from black ships that encountered strange resistance near these zones. Not violence, but psychic dampening. As if the fleets carried not only warriors, but blanks. An added safeguard. A way to prevent the taint of chaos from ever reaching these final scions. Others speak of Vox messages intercepted in deep space, speaking in flawless High Gothic with archaic dialects. We remember Terra, we hold the vigil, we await the throne's command. They do not name themselves, they do not explain, and they never reply more than once. More radical interpretations suggest these fleets were never meant to return. That the Imperium feared what they represented too much. That these were the Emperor's final gamble. The last true Astartes, untouched by betrayal. But once the heresy scarred the soul of the Imperium, no one could bear to see their faces, because in those eyes, the ghost of what was lost would always stare back. There is even a terrifying alternate theory that these are not loyal sons, but sleeper agents. Time-locked relics of a contingency plan buried so deep that not even the High Lords remember it. If Terra ever truly falls, these fleets might awaken. Not to save, but to purge, to cleanse what remains, to rebuild, not in the Emperor's vision, but in their own. For now, they drift. No one speaks of them in official circles. The Inquisition has no interest in pursuing the rumor. The Astartes chapters, both loyalist and successor, refuse to discuss any genetic lines outside their own, and the Adeptus Custodes remain utterly, chillingly silent. But somewhere beyond Neptune, in the cold dark void between orbits, a fleet of unmarked ships still turns slowly toward Terra. Inside them, perhaps, walk figures in black and gold, bearing heraldry never worn, singing hymns never heard, and waiting for a call that may never come. Not traitors, not loyalists, just orphans of an empire that never wanted them. The Imperium is decaying, not in the slow, manageable sense, not like a dying tree whose leaves fall in rhythm with the seasons, but like a fortress whose foundations are hollowed out, whose walls rot behind banners, whose defenders still shout victory while the enemy has already tunneled beneath their feet. This is the time of ending. The galaxy groans under the weight of 1,000,000 wars. The Astronomicon flickers, the warp rends open, and hope is something spoken of only in past tense. And yet, in the void around Terra, still they wait, the silent fleets. Waiting for what? Perhaps for this moment. There is a theory, spoken only in Vox-encrypted circles of the Inquisition and among the last true navigators of Sol, that the silent fleets are not just watchers or exiles, they are keys. A locked armada, weapons beyond weapons, and that the Emperor, in his last days of true agency, forged a contingency so vast it could not be stored in vaults, nor hidden in the warp, but had to be dispersed into orbit itself. A fail-safe against the end. Some believe this was Malcador's doing, the Sigillite's final act before he turned to ash. That he gathered the last loyal remnants of shattered projects, cursed experiments, forgotten weapons, and doomed legions, and placed them not in stasis, but in orbit. Not as punishment, but as potential. A dormant legion of mechanisms and minds bound by silence, encoded with a condition awaken when all other lights have failed. The idea is haunting. That Terra is not surrounded by ghosts or enemies or scavengers, but by a ring of sleeping giants, arcs of intervention. And that only when the throne itself ceases to pulse, when the golden light dies, will their engines flicker and their hulls turn inward. These ships, the locked armada, are said to be beyond classification. Some are thought to be artificial intelligences, not abominable intelligences, not heretical machine gods, but mind patterns designed by the Emperor himself in the dawn of the Imperium, before the Mechanicum's dogma calcified the laws of innovation. Others may be hybrid constructs, fusions of psychic resonance and mechanical thought, created in one final act of defiance against the long night to come. There are fragments of cryptic communication buried in Martian code vaults, ciphers that, when decoded, form instructions for building nothing. Instead, they describe where not to go, what not to activate, what not to remember. The implication, something is already built, already there. You do not need to create it, you need only unlock it. The ecclesiarchy calls these beliefs heresy, of course. They declare that there is nothing beyond Sol except the void and the Emperor's light. that the defense of Terra rests with faith, the Adeptus Custodes, and the might of the High Lords. But faith does not orbit. Faith does not block Auspex scans. Faith does not jam black ship navlogs near Pluto for reasons no tech priest can explain. And there is one final devastating element to the locked armada theory, that the fleets are not waiting for Terra to fall, but for it to be abandoned, that they are bound not to the survival of the Imperium, but to its surrender. That until the last battle brother withdraws, the last ecclesiarch refuses to kneel, the last voice of Terra still claims supremacy, the fleets will not activate. They are not reinforcements, they are replacements. In this version, the locked armada is not the salvation of the Imperium. It is its reboot. Ships filled with minds untainted by millennia of superstition. Weapons unbound by the Martian cult. Philosophies drawn not from worship, but from clarity. Perhaps even Astartes or something like them, bred not from old gene seed but from strands never touched by the heresy. A second humanity, waiting in the wings for the first to die. Not with hate, not with vengeance, but with precision. Because that is how the Emperor planned things, not as a father, but as an architect. Until that day comes, the fleets wait, silent, unmoving, watching as the Imperium burns in slow motion, as Primarchs return only to be lost again, as star systems vanish beneath black storms, as hope twists into fanaticism and victory becomes indistinguishable from loss. The locked armada does not pray, it does not plead. It was not made for love, it was made for necessity. And when the time arrives, when the last beacon fails, when the last loyal soul falls, they will awaken. Not with thunder, not with banners, but with inevitability. And in that moment, Terra will face a question it is not ready to ask. Was the Imperium ever the true plan, or just the first draft? There is an old myth that worms its way through the deepest hives of Terra, a tale told in whispers by dust-cloaked archivists and hollow-eyed scribes who transcribe the dreams of those who dwell too long beneath the throne. It is a myth of a war that never happened, a siege that left no scars, a conflict unrecorded, unremembered, unspoken. And yet, if one listens long enough to the silence in the high void above Terra, they may begin to feel it. Not sound, not vibration, something deeper, a presence. As if the stars themselves once screamed and then were forced to forget. This is the theory of the Forgotten War. It begins with a question: why are the records of Terra's orbital history so incomplete? For a civilization as obsessed with documentation as the Imperium, there are staggering gaps in the logs of Sol's defensive engagements. Whole centuries vanish from the battle chronicles. Strategic void station placements are altered without explanation. Ships recorded in one decade simply disappear in the next, their names purged from the Register Maternum. A million clerical errors? Perhaps, or perhaps something else was removed, deliberately and with terrifying precision. The tale, in its rawest and most blasphemous form, suggests that Terra was attacked, not during the siege at the end of the Horus Heresy, but long after. A second assault, silent and sudden, by an enemy so unexpected that its very nature was too dangerous to be remembered. Not demons, not Xenos, but us. Or rather, something that looked like us. The story claims that a fleet of human vessels emerged from the blackest edge of the Sol system, bearing no markings, transmitting no signals, but bearing technology far in advance of anything in the Imperium. Ships that were shaped like Imperial designs, but wrong, cleaner, colder, smarter. These attackers did not announce themselves. They simply arrived and began a maneuver not seen since the heresy, a cordon pattern, a slow and deliberate encirclement of Terra itself. The response was total. The Custodes were deployed in space for the first time since the siege, the Phalanx roused from its dormant orbit, and the entire solar defense grid activated at full burn. But there was no battle, not one shot fired, not a single ship engaged. The intruding fleet simply watched. And then, nothing. The records of this event, if they ever existed, were erased. The ships vanished. Every astropath who witnessed the event was silenced. Some say they were soul-scoured. Others say they simply died of fear. Entire sections of Luna's darkside manufactoria were reportedly sealed and jettisoned into the void. And in the decades that followed, the structure of Sol's defenses subtly changed. New stations appeared in places previously deemed unstable. Entire rings of defense satellites were oriented not outward but inward, toward Terra itself. Why would such changes be made? Why would a non-event provoke such a seismic shift in the Imperial military doctrine? The prevailing fan theory is simple and horrifying. The attack was not repelled. It was bartered. A deal was made, a compromise struck, not out of cowardice, but out of desperation. Because whoever these attackers were, they could not be stopped. And they made it clear they did not want to destroy. They wanted to observe, to remain, to wait. In exchange for their silence, the Imperium gave them orbit. And the price of that silence? Oblivion. A psychic purge was enacted across Terra. Every record of the encounter scrubbed, every memory excised, entire battalions of the Inquisition reassigned or executed, entire Forge World data vaults wiped to bedrock. And those who could not forget, the psychers, the scribes, the oracles, were fed to the throne. The most terrifying part is this: the fleet is still there. It never left. It was simply folded into the silence. Ships were reconstructed to appear like asteroids, orbital anomalies, sensor ghosts. They are not gone. They are watching still. This theory gives new meaning to the phrase "the Watchers in orbit." It implies that Terra's greatest secret is not the Golden Throne, nor the Emperor's survival, but the truth that we have already lost. That an enemy more advanced, more patient, more human than we can imagine has already reached our doorstep and decided not to knock. The silence of the silent fleets is not emptiness. It is memory, forcibly suppressed. A war so traumatic to the psychic fabric of mankind that its only surviving monument is the chilling, quiet formation of ships that still encircle our system like mourners at a grave whose name has been chipped off the stone. We never won. We never even fought. We just forgot. And they wait still, watching, as if they know that eventually someone will remember. And when that happens, when the silence breaks, the war will resume. But it will not begin. It will simply continue. They are still there, still watching, still waiting. The Imperium looks outward with fury, toward the Eye of Terror, toward the Tyrannid tendrils, toward the Necron tombs awakening beneath dead suns. But in its blind, screaming rage, it has forgotten to look inward, not within itself metaphorically, but inward toward Sol, toward the skies above the Emperor's cradle. There, the Vultures still circle. They have never attacked, they have never left, and they have never spoken, but they are waiting. The truth that rings through every theory, every forbidden log, every quiet dread passed down by those who know, is that silence is not peace. Silence is the space between breaths. The moment before judgment is past. What are they? Failed futures, cursed legacies. Ghosts, witnesses, weapons. Perhaps all of them, perhaps none. But they are more than myth. They are there. And in a galaxy ruled by noise, by voxcasters and war cries and the howls of daemons, their silence is deafening. Every faction, the Custodes, the Mechanicus, the Inquisition, the Ecclesiarchy, they all know, and they all lie. They bury it in doctrine, in redacted texts, in the execution of the curious. Because they cannot afford the truth. Because to face it would be to admit that Terra is not alone. That even at the peak of its glory, even as the spiritual heart of mankind, it is being judged by those who orbit, by those who wait. What will happen when the fleets descend? No one knows. Perhaps they will bring ruin, perhaps they will bring renewal, or perhaps they will bring only the mirror and force mankind to look at what it has become, a creature of rust and fire and blind repetition. They are the test. The Imperium does not know it is failing. The final question the Emperor wrote into the stars. And that is the truth behind the silent fleets. They were never coming for Terra. They were waiting for it to come to them. The void does not forget. It archives, not in words or data, but in form, in shape, in the slow, patient orbit of things no longer alive but still moving. Between Neptune and Pluto, in the frozen shell of a worldlet unnamed by imperial cartographers, there is said to be a graveyard of ships, an unmarked halo of derelicts that no one built, and no one claims. Their configurations are inconsistent, evolving, as if reshaping themselves in mimicry of other vessels, Imperial, Eldari, Orc, even Necron. But they are not. They are something else, and their mimicry is not flattery, it is study. Some among the Ordo Xenos call this zone the Hall of Echoes. It does not appear on maps. It cannot be accessed through standard warp routes. It seems to phase in and out of real space, visible only during specific alignments of Sol's moons, a celestial pattern that repeats every 87 years. And when it does, strange phenomena occur across the outer system. astropathic nausea, electromagnetic static, even spontaneous mass senescence readings across otherwise null zones. These moments are fleeting but consistent, and they always correspond with activity from the silent fleets. The Hall of Echoes is believed by some to be their origin point, not in the chronological sense but in the philosophical. A space where forgotten timelines deposit their refuse. Vessels too strange to classify, too unstable to destroy. A cosmic museum of failure. Others argue it is not a graveyard at all, but a crucible. A place where different versions of reality overlap. Ships from possible futures, alternate pasts, broken branches of history that lead to nowhere. They drift there, not as debris, but as data. And the silent fleets, they are the archivists. There is a fan theory, drawn from recovered pre-heresy philosophic logs of forbidden imperial thinkers, that describes the concept of the temporal transcriptor, an ancient machine consciousness seated by the emperor in the pre-unification era, whose sole purpose was to witness, not to rule, not to intervene, simply to record the divergence of humanity's possible destinies. This transcriptor would, over thousands of years, build a library not of texts, but of timelines. It would collect ships, technologies, failed experiments, entire civilizations, not for preservation, but for understanding. And if such a being exists, it would not store its collection in Terra's light. It would do so far from the gaze of gods, in shadow, in silence. Among the black ships, some captains speak of nightmare voyages, detours into the dark where time becomes elastic, where their crews age in days and their gellar fields throb with strain. In these stories, they pass through the hull, not entirely, not fully, but just close enough to see. And what they describe is not battle debris or ancient hulks. They describe movement, ships turning to observe them, forms shifting as if correcting themselves to match what is expected. Vox interference that sounds not like static, but like breathing. One captain, later excommunicated and executed for temporal heresy, left a log scrawled in blood across the inside of her chamber. It read, "They are not watching us. They are watching who we might have been." Others speculate that the silent fleets use the Hall of Echoes as a calibration tool, a reference point, that each time they shift formation or alter vector slightly, it is not random, it is an act of alignment, a ritual of correction, as if they are trying to position themselves into the one perfect configuration that will trigger something. A beacon, a collapse, an awakening, no one knows. But the deeper horror, the one few dare to voice, is that perhaps we too are part of the hall. That our reality is not the central one, but merely another archive, another failed pattern. That the true Imperium, the one meant to be, exists elsewhere or never came to be at all. And the fleets are not watching to judge us. They are waiting to see if we matter. In some ways, this theory offers a kind of comfort, that even in failure, humanity is remembered, that no timeline is entirely lost. But it also strips away the arrogance of destiny. If we are just one shelf among many, then our wars, our heroes, even our gods, they are not unique. They are echoes. And echoes do not shape the future. They merely reverberate through it. In a forgotten canticle from the Dark Mechanicum, captured during the scouring of a heretic moon near Thonia, a line is whispered over and over by machine priests reduced to feral murmuring. The Watchers archive what dies. The silence speaks only of the living. At the time, it was considered nonsense. Now some inquisitors wonder if it was a warning. Perhaps the fleets will never land. Perhaps that was never their purpose. Perhaps they are waiting for something we cannot give. Not repentance, not resistance, but resonance. The proof that this version of mankind has meaning. Or perhaps, one day, they will look away. And that will be the end. Because silence is only terrifying when it ends, when it becomes judgment. And as Terra burns brighter with war, with psychic rage, with devotion and despair, the Watchers have not moved, but they have not turned away. There are rumors, less spoken than breathed, that the fleets beyond Sol are not just made of metal, that not all of them are ships in the conventional sense, that at least one of them, perhaps more, is alive. This theory, sometimes whispered by rogue traders returning from chartless voids, has no name in official archives, but among the most heretical circles of the Ordo Xenos, it is called the Ark-born hypothesis. It suggests that one of the Watchers circling the Sol system is a bioconstruct of staggering scale, a living organism, grown in silence, older than the Imperium, and perhaps not of human design at all. A creature that wears the mask of a vessel. A thing that mimics starships not through engineering, but through evolution. It is not a tyrannid, not an enslaved thing. It is something stranger. The theory stems from a series of bizarre incidents logged by deep void servitor arrays across the outermost edges of Sol. These sensor stations, deployed centuries ago to monitor cometary drift and interstellar radiation, occasionally catch something moving against the stellar backdrop. Too slowly to be mechanical, too unpredictably to be automated. The object is vast. Estimated length 27 kilometers. Shape inconsistent. Mass shifting. It does not emit standard energy signatures. Instead, it pulses. A rhythm, a heartbeat. The Mechanicus, when pressed, denies the anomaly's existence. But a redacted transcript from a dying Magos, recovered from a scavenged data casket on a derelict orbiting Titan, includes a final confession. The Ark sings. But it does not sing to us. What does it sing to then? Some believe this living vessel is a remnant of the dark age of technology, a failed biogenesis experiment designed to explore the stars without machines. A sentient ecosystem, grown in artificial gravity, whose thoughts echo across its own cellular architecture. Others think it is older still, that it predates humanity, that the Emperor himself once saw it, and that its presence over Sol was not a coincidence, but an agreement, a pact of mutual non-interference, an ancient thing recognizing something familiar in a man who was more than a man. But there is a third theory, far more chilling, that the Ark is becoming human, that it has watched mankind for so long, listened to our transmissions, observed our wars, our prayers, our pain, and has begun to mimic, not just in structure, but in thought, that it is building, cell by cell, a mind shaped by the echo of our own. And in doing so, it is becoming something terrible, not Xenos, not machine, but a reflection. One disturbing report from a black ship that drifted near its projected location describes a dream shared by every psyker on board, a dream of a cathedral floating in space, filled with organs made of starlight and bones carved from failed histories. In this vision, something sat upon a throne of embryonic iron, wearing a face that flickered between familiar and foreign. A face that spoke not in words, but in understanding. The psychers awoke screaming. Some did not wake at all. The Ark is not alone. Some theorists believe it is the heart of the fleet, that the other ships, mechanical, hybrid, or otherwise, orbit it, not Terra. That it is the source, the axis around which everything else turns. A biological fulcrum of observational gravity. Perhaps the rest of the fleet exists to protect it, or perhaps to keep it asleep. Because the idea that the Ark is dreaming, that its mind is not yet awake, is the one thread of comfort in this tangled horror. That its pulsing rhythm is not a language, not a summons, but a heartbeat in sleep. And if it ever wakes, then what? Some fear it will descend, not to conquer, but to speak, and that whatever it says will end us. Because how could we survive being understood by something that knows us better than we know ourselves? Others suggest the Ark was made to awaken only under one condition, when Terra dies. That it is a failsafe not built by mankind but for it. A biological Ark in the truest sense, not to carry us but to remember us, to witness, to sing our extinction to the stars long after we are gone, a living epitaph. And then there are those who believe it is already awake, that its silence is not sleep, but restraint, that it listens not because it is idle, but because it is patient. That it watches Sol, not as a stranger, but as a guardian, a warden, a final shepherd waiting to see if the flock will perish on its own. In the sacred vaults of the Sisters of Silence, in a tomb mission known as the Opus of Hollow Light, a mural exists. No one admits who painted it, no name is signed. It shows a vast creature in orbit above a burning world. Its form is not defined. It is half ship, half organism, half cathedral. It has no weapons, it does not move. But from its open decks pour the ghosts of 1,000 dead legions, warriors who resemble Astartes, yet are not. In the background, a golden throne is empty. Below the image, scratched into the plasteel in a forgotten dialect of High Gothic, is a single phrase. We dreamed of angels, we built monsters, now the monsters dream of us. Perhaps that is the final horror of the silent fleets, that not all of them are silent because they cannot speak. Some are silent because they are still listening. And among them, one listens more closely than all the rest. waiting for the day it finally has something worth saying back. If you've enjoyed exploring this unsettling mystery with us and you want to dive deeper into the forgotten truths, forbidden technologies, and terrifying wonders of Warhammer 40k lore, subscribe to the channel and join our ongoing archive of the Imperium's darkest secrets. The stars are watching, and so are we.